Underway.
Cool. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the London Archives. My name is Tom. I'm an engagement learning officer here at the Archives, and my colleague Simon here is kindly running the chat and running the online event for us. So everyone knows this is a hybrid event, so obviously welcome if you're in the room, and welcome if you're at home as well. I say at home, wherever you are, you're welcome from that location. That's fine. So we can be sure that the sound is working, which is always a good start. Just a few bits of housekeeping for those of you who've joined us in person. Just to let you know, the fire alarm's not going to fire alarm shouldn't go off. If it does go off, we'll treat it as a real evacuation and take the according steps. So we'll go out of these double doors at the back of the room, down the main set of stairs, and assemble on the other side of the road outside the archive. And the loos, if you've not found them, are just through those double doors, and they're tucked around the corner in the exhibition. And for those who are joining us at home, so my colleague Simon will be in the chat. So if you have questions or comments as you go along, please feel free to pop them in the chat. For both audiences, we'll save kind of questions till the end. It's a bit easier to deal with them that way, particularly with the hybrid format. But as I say, if you're at home, you can pop them in the chat as we go along, and we will catch them up. So some familiar faces in the room, so welcome back, and some new faces as well, so an extra warm welcome if you're new here. Those of you that are familiar will probably guess what I'm about to say. I'm about to give my standard disclaimer when I do a talk such as this, which is I'm not an expert on what we're talking about today. So, as I said, I'm an engagement learning officer, and so it's my job to sort of know a little bit about a lot of the collections that we have here. And we have a lot of collections here at the London Archives, to be precise, 950 miles worth of collections here. So my knowledge does get spread a little bit thin. So really what I like to do with these talks is maybe give you an idea of the sorts of things that we have at the archive, give you an idea of how you can access them, and maybe give you an idea of what you can find out with a little bit of research as well. So everything that we've found out today is either freely available through our collections, or with a bit of kind of Googling and judicious uses of the internet and the various sources like that. So that's the way that it's presented, and I hope you enjoy it as such. But that doesn't mean that we can't have tricky questions, comments, or corrections. But as I say, we'll save them to the end. And this is I think quite a fun and interesting topic that we're talking about today. So we'll be thinking about the work of a London-based photographer, Henry Dixon, and we'll be spending most of our time looking at the two kind of projects that he's associated with that appear most strongly in our collections, and that's his work photographing the building and the opening of the Holborn Viaduct, and his work for the Society for the Protection of the Relics of Old London. And we'll just touch on with a few images his later work as well. And as I said, I'm not an expert. I suppose the reason I wanted to give that caveat is this and therefore the earliest photographs of London that we hold are from the 1840s. It's a view of the monument dated to approximately 1840 to 1845. But the technology we're going to look at has moved on a little bit from that. We're dealing with what we call plate negatives in a kind of a wooden box camera like that, a fairly bulky piece of equipment mounted on a tripod, and through that, we will see that we can get really quite beautiful and accurate and sort of high fidelity images of London. But it also gives us a sense of some of the technical difficulties that Henry Dixon was working with. So that's a fairly big piece of equipment in working with busy and crowded streets. And we know that one of Henry Dixon's favourite ruses for working was to basically ride around in a wagon, a horse-drawn wagon with his camera inside, and then when he found something he wanted to take a photograph of, he would, I'm not quite sure what the sort of Victorian horse-drawn equivalent of a breakdown, but he would pretend to have a breakdown, and he'd get one of his assistants to sort of make a big show of changing a wheel of the wheel of his vehicle, and whilst that was going on, he would be photographing. So that gives us a sense of what people were up against in terms of the technology, and it also gives us a sense of perhaps of London's sort of busy and chaotic street life, and that's really going to lead us into the bulk of our presentation this afternoon, because the period in which Henry Dixon was active in his sort of photographic career spans a really interesting chapter of London history. So this is the period from 1860 onwards. Our first images we're looking at is from 1860, and actually the last images we're going to look at are 1910. But the bulk of what we're looking at is going to be 1860 to 1880s. And as I say, this is a really interesting chapter in London history. So in general, the 19th century, I think it's fair to say, is the century in which the London we sort of know today really comes into being in terms of the density of its population, in terms of its infrastructure, and things like that. So to give you a sense of how much London grows in the 19th century, at the year 1801, the population of London is a little over 1 million people, and by 1901, so obviously a century later, the population is in sort of rough numbers 6.5 million. You can say 7 million if you want to round it up. So that's a huge growth in population, and that brings us all manner of in the long run, it brings all manner of kind of benefits in terms of the arts and culture and material goods and the like. But at the very least, we can say it was a difficult process, and we can say there was a lot of hardship along the way. London effectively reinvents itself through the 19th century, and by that I mean it rebuilds itself through the 19th century. In his thoroughly recommended book, London in the 19th century, Jerry White talks about kind of effectively the demise of old London. That's the Georgian London being kind of swept away, at least in sort of obvious, in the most obvious sort of thoroughfares, being kind of swept away by a series of improvements. First by the Crown, so we can think there a bit before our time of the building of Regent Street, and then later by the City of London and the Metropolitan Board of Works, and then later still by the London County Council. And that takes us to the image that we have on the screen here. So this is from around 1860, and the resolution isn't perfect, so let me just start to read that text for you at the bottom. It says, "The City of London as it appeared a century since, with the street improvements, public works and buildings executed by the Corporation of London or by the City, by the Commission of Service for the City, since the erection of the first bridge at Blackfriars circa 1760. And what we can see there is a map of the city, as in the City of London, the square mile, and the surrounding area. That blue border that you can see is the city boundary, and the various red roads and red buildings are of course the improvements as they were described. And this idea of improvement was very important to Victorian London in general, but this period in particular. in sort of rough numbers, roughly speaking, we can say that the first half of the century sees kind of a really kind of chaotic or organic growth as people come to the city looking for work, looking for opportunity. And if you think about the London, that's the London of Charles Dickens, of the what would be described at the time as the slums and the rookeries, with all the problems of sanitation and cholera and disease and those images of crime, all that sort of thing. That was that London. But by the second, third of the century, we start to see people trying to improve those conditions as London becomes richer, and as there's a sense of those conditions aren't really appropriate. There's a humanitarian impulse, and I think it's fair to say that there's an impulse as well of these things are unsightly and unfit, and they're best sort of moved away and swept away. And one way in which those conditions were improved, to use the slightly loaded jargon of the time, was through the very type of street building that we are seeing. So some of the principal routes that were built in the Victorian times were deliberately built sort of to go both improve access to the city of Westminster or the city of London, or to move it around, but often those routes were planned with a kind of an idea of what would have been seen as social progress at the time, but clearing the slums. So Victoria Street, for example, one of the big improvement works in the city of Westminster, was sort of deliberately planned to go through what's called the Devil's Acre, one of the most famously really the archetypal slum of that period of London. And similarly, and the Devil's Acre is obviously, that name was given to it by Dickens, and it's thought to be the inspiration for sort of Fagin's Lair in Oliver Twist. But the actual geographical location of Fagin's Lair was Saffron Hill, and that was on the entrance to the city, and that's actually this red road that we can see coming here. And I realised at home I've just unhelpfully stepped outside of the camera. So of the things we can see on the screen there, it's the one on the left hand side, the westernmost of those street improvements. This again was targeted to improve, to clear that slum, in the language of the day. And this is modern day Farringdon. Modern day. Do come in and sit down if you like, sir. Modern day Farringdon Street here. And as part of this work, we have Farringdon Street built to kind of allow entrance from the north. From the south to the north. But we also have the building of the Holborn Viaduct as well. And this is what's going to now kind of entertain us, I hope, at least for the next portion of our talk. So the building of the Holborn Viaduct was, say, documented by Henry Dixon, who we've touched on a little bit. Just to say that he was born in 1820, died in 1893, and he was originally a printer. But then in sort of the latter part of his career, so the second half of his life, he trained as a photographer as this technology becomes more apparent, more widespread, and obviously more popular, and we assume at least somewhat more lucrative as well. And he was tasked with documenting the building of the Holborn Viaduct by the City Improvement Committee, and we'll look at some of those images in turn as we go along, get a sense of the history of it unfolding. I'll try not to editorialize too much about the photographs. I think actually one of the nice things to do is to sort of sit and appreciate them. So I'll move through them. I hope fairly relaxed pace, and just point out some key features, but I'll try not to go overboard. Perhaps not the most glamorous image to start with, but if we think back to that map that we just saw, a lot of the commentators, when they're talking about Victorian on the stage, just describe how it was one perpetual building site, and obviously, so that seemed an appropriate place to start. And it also points to the real kind of virtues of photography as a medium, that depending on the subject chosen, it can give us a sense of the everyday. Perhaps sometimes gives us a sense of the everyday more than sort of more sort of painterly styles, which the mode of presentation can tend to edit these sort of grimier and more quotidian elements. Not entirely, of course, but something I think that we can say with some justification. So London would have looked quite a lot like this. Another building site photograph here. again from the building of the Holborn Viaduct. And what is interesting, of course, about these photographs is the way that they do document the things in stages, the incidentals, as well as the kind of more framed and posed subjects here. So these photographs and other similar photographs are to give us not just an insight into sort of the topography of London, but also, you know, building technology there. We can think of the wooden scaffolding. We can think of the brick archway at the bottom. You follow that line of the scaffolding, and of course, if people would like to sit down, you're very welcome to. And we can also, it also gives us the incidentals as well of things like dress as well. And what's very nice about these photographs is we do have that people are included in them. The series that we'll see in the second half of the presentation, people feature a lot less prominently and a lot less often. So we can see the dress of the I've always assumed, if we're seeing top hat and tails, that's someone on the committee, and then we can see how that contrasts with the kind of the dress and attire of the people who are building the viaduct. And one of the things that's I think quite special about the Henry Dixon photographs is notwithstanding everything I just said about how they are being used to sort of document the everyday, they're also very interesting and very pleasing from a kind of a compositional standpoint, from an artistic standpoint. And I think this is a really good example, of that. You can think of the way all the various elements of the photograph are put together, from the sort of visual interest at the front with I believe that's called a mortar wheel, so that would have been used to mix up the various sort of the cement that was used in the construction process. You know, that's in the foreground. You can see that sort of diagonal line of the scaffolding breaking up there, the way the people are sort of arranged going from front to back, different visual points of interest there. If you're a fan of thinking about your photographs in terms of I forgot the name of it, it's annoying me, the golden mean, where you divide it into a 3x3 grid, and you put something on the various points of those grids. You can see how there's a little bit of that going on as well. So we get that real sense of the way that they're composed with an interesting eye. This one in particular, composition, I think very interesting and very rewarding, and how that's being blended with things that are probably a bit more documentary. You can really see how, actually, yes, that is composed nicely. If you think about, the sort of the rule of thirds on the photograph there, but that does feel like something we can easily sort of recognise today as let's get the group photo at the end of the activity, and this is the city improvement. Committee. We can see them kind of posing, particularly like the sort of the nonchalant or languished pose of the chap right at the front there on the bricks, gives us a nice counterpoint perhaps to that impression we often carry around about Victorians as being very stiff, being very proper. We think about kind of the posed Victorian family photograph. That gives us one sense of things. This gives us another impression entirely. And by this point, my understanding is if a particular type of camera is used, the exposure times are fairly low. So we don't have that hallmark. We think of you have to sit absolutely still in the same way. And I think you get a lot of life and character here. And we also, of course, it's an everyday shot, we get a sense of kind of the fashion and the changing fashions as well, something that we can pick up on in a little bit as well. So I probably should have said this earlier. This building work is taking place between 1867 and 1869, and by 1869, by sort of the summer of 1869, work is nearly complete. So this is the Holborn Viaduct. We are looking east across the viaduct. We can see that the main structure has been sort of mostly built at this stage, and what we're seeing here, what we're seeing here is the carriageway being put. What's going to be the carriageway being put in. You can see this big stash of bricks, of stones. I believe they were known as sets at the time, that would give the Victorian streets their kind of famously cobbled appearance. And this next shot gives us a bit of a closer view of that process of the streets being put in. So this is how you lay a road without without power tools, without pneumatic drills. So like we said before, the people in the white shirts, the more kind of practical outfit, the white shirts, the neckerchiefs, the non-top hats. I forget what these types of hats are called. The people not wearing the top hats, it's a posed photograph, but what they are posing with is the kind of the drivers that they'll use, wooden drivers, to sort of flatten the ground prior to the sets being put on. So again, a posed photograph, but also an incidental detail that gives us insight into the construction process behind this very important piece of Victorian infrastructure. And as again with any of these incidental, sometimes it's nice to look in the background to see what else that we can see. So on that church in the background there, you get a sense of actually how dirty and filthy that church is. So London was a famously filthy city at this time for all different sorts of reasons. What we're probably seeing there is an accumulation of coal soot from the various fires used both in cooking and heating, and to a certain extent in this part of town, manufacture as well. Another close-up view here. Those of you who are familiar with the Holborn Viaduct, or this part of town, will perhaps be aware that the Holborn Viaduct crosses over Farringdon Street, and there is access between the two levels with these very grand sets of sort of grand staircases, and that's the staircase building in the back. And then once again, continuing the theme from the previous slide, we can see the way that the bridge is being built. So this is going to be a part iron construction. Iron was, if you like, the wonder building material of the Victorian period, allowing new types of structures to be built. Most famously, of course, the Crystal Palace, or the Great Exhibition of 1851, but it obviously wasn't just used in sort of showcase buildings like that. It became a kind of a daily building tool, both practically, we can see here in the road surface, use of metalwork, but also in kind of architectural forms at the back. I think there's something quintessentially Gothic about ironwork, something quintessentially Victorian about Gothic detailing. So inspired by the architecture of medieval England in particular, of course, but medieval Europe more generally. But that being transferred into ironwork. So an old aesthetic being transferred into what was at the time a very modern building material. And this image here, as the work is progressing, gives us again a sense of the everyday, but also a sense of the disruption. And I don't want to sound like I'm grumbling, but I commute from Waterloo Station at the moment. I come up from Waterloo, across Blackfriars Bridge, and up Farringdon Street myself, and I think it's at least the last year there have been roadworks the whole time in various stages, various diversions on the cycle lanes and the like. Just when you think a new bit's done, that you can go around a different way, and other bits being worked on. I mustn't grumble, because I like to have fresh water. I like to have flat roadways. So I understand the necessity of it. But it did make me smile when I was putting this presentation together. It really felt like an example of, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And as I say, just get the sense of the disruption that causes, but also we get, again, in terms of incidental daily details. We can see the posters along the right hand side, giving a sense of kind of life carrying on despite the disruptions. And there's also another nice chance, probably our first chance, to get a sense of what the finished process is going to look like. We teased it talking about the ironwork in the previous slide. But here we can see the kind of the approach from from the north there, with the City of London City of London crest very prominent there in the top of the bridge. But also you can see how it's worked into the ironwork there in what's called one of my favourite architectural terms, the spandrels. So the spandrels are those sort of corner triangles of the bridge there. You might just be able to make out the dragons there as well. A similar shot, but with a bit more posed there. We can see that the roadway is open now, except for the people posing for the photograph, and we get a sense, and we also can see in this image as well that we're nearing completion, because the 4 allegorical statues that also adorn the bridge are now in place on the top row there. So it's nearing completion. And here we get not a photograph that's aged terribly well. We get another sense of the work as it draws near a close. And I also quite like the carriages in this one as well. Again, just that sense of the incidentals coming through. So this is, as I alluded to earlier, this is an album and print, and my understanding is, so I'm happy to be informed better on this, or even corrected in the questions. My understanding is that these do have this characteristic kind of sepia tone, and this kind of characteristic aging in this style as well. And also alluding to that fact that I mentioned earlier, London is a very dirty city. There's a lot of smoke in the air. There's a lot of chemicals in the air. All that sort of thing. And because photography at this time is, of course, a chemical process, that can interfere as well. Not to say that's what's happening in this specific case, but I thought it's just a nice thing to mention as well. I just think I'll skip through this one because we've had quite a lot of that view, but I did want to show you this one. So this is looking to the east. We can see the carriageway nearly completed, but actually what I'm more interested in this photograph, and the reason I chose to put it in, is because just for the adverts in the foreground there. Again, this idea of things that are ephemeral, incidental, perhaps on the grand scheme of things, but actually to be able to literally look back in time on them 150 odd years later is quite rewarding. And I particularly like the Midland Railway in the middle there. You might be able to see this says Midland Railway. The Midland Company mainline trains now run from the new St Pancras station, because that is a really, obviously, it would be remiss of me to talk about Victorian London at this point without talking about the railways. So if roads like this are causing disruption when they're being built, the building of the railways is causing that disruption on a whole new level. I'm afraid I forget if it was 13 or 14 mainline stations that are built between 1850 and 1900, but whichever figure it is, that's a lot. And so London was a time, and at this time was being sort of severely disrupted by the building of the railways. And important to what we're talking about now, we might be forgiven for thinking that the railways are going to be solving London's traffic problems. We might be forgiven for thinking that the railways are going to be removing the need for sort of horse-drawn transport and the like, where in fact the exact opposite was the case. By bringing more people to London, it actually increased the traffic within London. Of course, that's why the Underground was built, and it would have opened actually the first journeys on the Underground would have been happening at the same time as this was being built as well. Again, that real sense of the London that we know and expect today coming together in this time frame. And part of the same series of photographs, we're now in November 1869, 6th of November 1869, and this is the opening of Blackfriars Bridge, which was construction and was taking place at the same time as the Holborn Viaduct, as part of a sort of a scheme to improve this access through the city and along through the city. Queen Victoria opened Blackfriars Bridge and Holborn Viaduct on the same day. So started at the bridge and then moved up to the viaduct. So as I said, 1869. Prince Albert, obviously Queen Victoria's I shouldn't assume, but I'm sure if you're here, you probably know this. Queen Victoria married to Prince Albert, a very sort of passionate and loving marriage. Prince Albert dies prematurely in his early 40s. In the start of the 1860s, and Queen Victoria goes into sort of extended period of grieving. She's heartbroken by the death of her husband, and in the 1860s she makes very few public appearances, really which becomes a source of controversy at the time. There's a sense that she's sort of not fit for the job, that she's sort of derelicting her duty by doing so, and so she's invited to open the Holborn Viaduct by the Lord Mayor of London in the summer of 1869, and she basically tries to not do it. She doesn't want to do it, and she has to sort of be persuaded. And if you read between the lines, I really get the sense kind of cajoled into doing it by her private secretary, General Grey. So the opening that we're seeing here was a noteworthy occasion, not just for the infrastructure, but because it was an example of a public appearance by Queen Victoria in this period. But just as a footnote, as the 1870s goes on, she does, recover at least outwardly, and she does have far more of a prevalent public profile. Again, the quality of these images isn't great. They've not aged terribly well. But I hope sort of within the blur you can get a sense of what's going on. You can see the Guards regiment at the front there. We can see the flag of the City of London, the Union Jack. We can see the carriages as they're coming through. And these are all the next couple of photographs are of the same scene. Get a sense of the grandeur of the occasion. Alongside the soldiers at the front there, you can make out the City of London police, and we can see the City of London police along the side there as well. And it's probably worth mentioning at this point, this is obviously very much being shown as a city occasion. There is a rivalry that exists between the City of London and the City of Westminster at this time. There's a rivalry that exists between the City of London and what was known as the Metropolitan Board of Works. So that was the body responsible for some of the improvements taking place outside the square mile, most famously the Victorian Embankment. There was a sense of each other kind of the Metropolitan Board of Works encroaching on the city's turf, you might say. So I think that's part of the reason, not entirely, but part of the reason we're seeing a lot of sort of city pageantry here as well. And we can come in a bit closer. And as I say, one of the nice things that we see in the photographs of Henry Dixon is not just the building process, but the people as well. So this is a really nice image, as is the next one, which I think is a bit closer up. Actually, no, I'm going to go back. Sorry, Simon, if you're changing the slides there. This image here of high Victorian fashion, particularly I think when we think of ladies' fashion in particular in the Victorian times, this I think is a lot of what we're thinking. Those big crinolines, those big skirts, and that particular silhouette. Close up now, just to get another sense of what's been going on, another sense of the pageantry. And I like this one as well because I don't know, I'm purely interpreting this, but you really get the sense of this one, just something about it feels a bit less formal. It's a smaller group. You get the sense that they've, a bit like at the end of a work, and after some of the formal photographs happened at a wedding, you just kind of get a few people that you know together, and this is a chance to get a photograph of them in a time obviously when photography was a rare medium. This seems a bit less formal somehow, a bit more intimate compared to certainly to the very grand photographs we saw a few slides ago, and it gives us a sense of a nice close-up of one of the statues, the four allegorical statues that are on the bridge. This is Commerce, as you can see here. So again, that sense of this not just being a functional object, but being kind of an artistic one as well. We'll skip through that one, I think. So yeah, think we'll start there. So we've spent quite a bit of time on the Holborn Viaduct photographs that Henry Dixon produced, for the reason that I've recently done a few talks on the section that I'm about to talk about now. So I didn't want to overlap too much with that work, but it would be remiss of me not to talk a little bit about this second chapter of Henry Dixon's work that we document here at the London Archives. But if you're interested in this in more detail, if you have access to YouTube, there are sort of extended talks. There's a full-length talk about this section of his work that you can view there. So what we're about to we've sort of spent the first more than half, the first sort of 2/3 of the talk thinking about a London that's being built, a London that's demolishing things, about building sites, about improvement. And so what we're going to sort of end with is a nice counterpoint, because as that's going on, people are starting to realise that in all that demolition, in all that rebuilding of things, that some historical things are being lost, some important things are being lost, things that people are just sort of fond of are being lost. And that idea of capturing something before it disappears is the inspiration for the series of 120 photographs that Henry Dixon is probably most famous for. And they are for, I can never quite say this, but the Society Photographing the Relics of Old London. And over the course of just over 10 years, the Society for the Photographing the Relics of Old London basically select buildings that they think are either under threat or somehow kind of typical of the London of their time, and they photograph them for posterity. And we're lucky to have the complete set here at the London Archives, and that's what you can see on the screen here. So the impetus for this project was the inevitable demolition of the Oxford Arms. So the Oxford Arms is what's called a galleried coaching inn, located just behind St Paul's Cathedral. If any of you've been to the George in Southwark, that's the only surviving example, as I understand it, of a galleried coaching inn. But these were once a staple of London life. So they were. So coaching inns, as the name implies, if you were travelling to London by coach, this is where you would stop, often on the outskirts of the city for obvious reasons. You could get hospitality for yourself. You could sleep. You could eat. You could drink. You could conduct your business. You get hospitality and then the horses would have been looked after on the same site as well. So these are a staple of London life, but. We're now in the 1870s, but by the 1870s they are obsolete effectively. The railways have taken the place of the coaching trade, and the Grand Railway Hotel has taken the place of the galleried coaching inn. If you want to think of a Grand Railway Hotel, look no further than the Midland Hotel at St Pancras. But some people, and particularly one Alfred Marks, were very fond of these galleried coaching inns, and he wrote to the Times in March 1875. As the destruction of the Oxford Arms at no distant date is therefore certain, to have a set of photographic views of it taken, and should any reader of the Times interested in London antiquaries desire to join the subscription, I shall be happy to hear from them. And this was the birth of the Society for Protection of Relics of Old London. This letter in the Thames, a small group of people kind of get together. Saying it's a society probably makes it sound a bit grander than it was. We think there was probably about 100 or so subscribers. But what they do, as I say, over a series of about 11 years, they photograph various things of interest in London. Henry Dixon is part of this operation from the start, but for the early years, so the first 4 years of their operation, just going to check that date. Yes, for the first 4 years of the operation, he's not photographing; he is printing the photographs instead, and the photographer was the father and son team of A&J Ball, with often Alfred Marks giving very detailed instructions of what he wants photographing and how. But from 1879, Henry Dixon takes on the photographic duties as well. And what follows is just a couple of photographs from this collection. As I say, if you want more, I can refer you to the online talks. We get a sense of his work here. Again, that really interesting eye for composition, and you might notice as well that these images are actually better quality. They're in terms of the tone, the colour, the clarity. So because there was an idea that these were photographs that were being kept for posterity, what we might call an archive, the process for printing the photographs, a carbon print process, was chosen because it was known to give a particularly high quality image and to give a very stable image as well. Hence the different sort of tone and tonal character of the images compared to the other. So, as I've sort of said, 120 images were taken, and the idea of this project was to document buildings that would be or could be demolished. In total, about half of the buildings that were documented were either demolished at the time or quite a lot in the 20th century as well, in particular as part, obviously, the enemy action and the clearing up afterwards in the Second World War. And what we tend to find, the pattern of what survives and what doesn't, buildings that have some kind of institutional presence, that are part of something bigger, tended to survive, and those that were perhaps dilapidated businesses or houses didn't. So on the left we can see Barnard's Inn. Barnard's Inn has survived, and Aldersgate's house in Aldergate Street, which haven't. And then just a few more to give a sense of this work. This is the Charter House, chosen partly because it's quite near where we are in Farringdon at the London Archives. It's a sort of an important local landmark. Charter House is a corruption of the Carthusian, so it's an old monastery. So partly chosen because of its local flavour, and partly just because I really rather happen to like number 40 there, the cloisters thing. It's a very kind of beautiful and evocative image, which gives a sense of the history of that place. And then a couple more from Henry Dixon. This is Ashburnham House. I'm less interested in Ashburnham House, it's the image on the left for its sake, but what I am interested in is Westminster Abbey in the background, because calling this Henry Dixon's London, part of the thing I was trying to capture with this talk is some of that every day. And one thing that we have lost in the 21st century, 20th as well, but especially so, I would argue, in the 21st, is a sense of the scale of some of the medieval and restoration buildings. Think St Paul's Cathedral, think Westminster Abbey, buildings that once were built on a grand scale to kind of dominate the architecture as part of their, as part of their worship, as part of their symbolism, now are, relatively speaking, small compared to the skyscrapers and the like that we see. So it's quite nice to get this idea of what this skyline or the building line would have looked like. And again, purely from whim, I'm actually quite a sucker for a nice ornate staircase, so I thought we'd have the interior shot on the right hand side there as well. Some of you might recognise this as St John's Gate, Clerkenwell, another local site, and also we can see the last of the images taken by the Society for Protecting the Relics of Old London, just called five subjects, which are various sort of interesting architectural features dotted about London. And just really as something as a footnote, as we come to the end of the main presentation, I just wanted to allude to kind of a few other works of Henry Dixon that we have in our collection. He was carried on working for this. I'm afraid the name of the particular one escapes me. For the various committees of the City of London, and we get a sense of that work that he's doing there. On the left-hand side, this is a premises in Adel Street that was destroyed by fire. As I understand it, the fire was 82, the photographs 83, and then 87 land let in Arthur Street. Again, enjoying it as much for the incidentals of the horses and the street and the vehicles as the image itself. But again, just gives you a sense of how these things come down to us. And then our last image is from 1910, well outside of Victorian London. And if you were remembering that Henry Dixon died in 1893, you might wonder why we were in 1910. Henry Dixon worked with his son, Thomas Dixon. They had a family business together, and these two photographs are from are by Thomas Dixon. On the left, Aldgate Street again, with the newspaper boys outside it. We've had some quite classic archetypal Victorian images so far. So nice to now be in the Edwardian age. I think of those newspaper boys with their flat caps, quite evocative of that time period. And just to really give the sense of the generations changing, on the right-hand side there, we have the exterior of S. Crouch and Sons shop and office fitters, and the interesting feature here being this is possibly one of the earliest electricians in London on the right-hand side there. And with that brings the formal part of the presentation to a close. So I'd be very happy to take questions, to hear your comments about the photographs that we've seen, and dare I say it, if there's anything I need correcting on, I'm open to that as well. So what we'll do, we'll take photographs, take questions. Sorry, it's been a long week. We'll take questions from the room first up, to give the people at home a chance to catch up, because there's a little bit of a delay on the stream. And what I'll do, although there is a room mic here, it doesn't always pick up questions from the room perfectly, so I'll just repeat your question for the benefit of people at home, and then once the people at home have had a chance to catch up, I'll take some questions from home as well, and we'll just go back and forth until we've answered all the questions, or we run out of time, whichever happens. So over to you. Any questions? Yes.
At the beginning of this talk,
yeah.
I may have misunderstood what you were saying. I was intrigued. You said when he used to be driven around in this cart and set up his camera, he used to pretend there was something. Why was that? You didn't need a permit to film, or did he not want people to notice him, or?
Yeah. So the question was, just to bring people home, is why all the fuss about the cart and the subterfuge? I'm not entirely sure. Is the first answer. My understanding is two things. There was, in the 1860s, some attempts to not let people photograph on the streets of London. If you're interested, I can point you to the appropriate book in this book here, Change of Metropolis by Gavin Stamp. So there was, I think, some sense of you shouldn't be doing it. I think it was partly not to be disturbed. I think as I'm sure you know, as soon as you bring a camera, people act differently, and I think it was so he could. It's actually quite a difficult, as I said, it's a difficult process. So I think it gave him that space to do it. And thinking out loud somewhat now as well, I wonder if that was a way to have an undisturbed area around him so he could manage the process, but stop in traffic, if you see what I mean. I wonder if that gave him a vantage point he couldn't otherwise get. But that last one is a supposition rather than anything else. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the room? Okay. If you there's no pressure. If you have them, let me know. Are there any questions from at home, Simon? Okay. Well, we'll give it another minute, because sometimes I think there can be a bit of a delay. A delay for the questions at home.
More and more. So more and more you realise what an unbelievably noisy city it must have been. What with all the building work and the carriages and tube being built as well as unbelievable.
Absolutely. So the question, or comment really, was more and more you realise what a noisy city it would have been in terms of the building work, the carriages, that sort of thing. Yes, I think we have, in some other research that I've done, the project work recently, you definitely get the sense that people have a very romanticised view of Victorian, of the past in general, and Victorian London in particular, of it being beautiful and sedate and all these sorts of things. And I don't think that is, if we did have that time machine, I don't think that's what we would find at all. And even the photographs that we see, particularly the earlier ones, can be misleading. We do see a lot of traffic in later Victorian photographs. Often the photographers are working at the in the morning, so they've got less disruption, but also that's a good time to take photographs. So there's less traffic there. They're trying to take photographs of the buildings rather than the traffic, so that gets left out as well. So I think you're absolutely right. And then what we can't see with these images, and it's probably best that we can't, just how dirty and smelly it would have been. So it's probably not a hugely reliable figure, but because for various reasons. But we, at this point in time, I think of about 75,000 horses on the streets of London. By the end of the period, the figure you read again, take it with a pinch of salt, but it gives a sense of it. It's 300,000 horses on the streets of London. London mud was famous, and it was mostly comprised of horse dung and soot. You know, it wasn't a nice place on the centres in some regard, or certainly the streets wouldn't have been. And indeed, that Victorian preoccupation, or that Victorian virtue of cleanliness, probably comes from exactly those things as a way to counter your environment. I think there's a question from home.
There is a question from home. Are these photos grouped together on a line just to be seen by the archives?
Yes. So I should have. I'm really pleased you asked that question. It was remiss of me not to mention it earlier. The inspiration for me doing this talk was partly our Victorian exhibition. But if you go on the London Picture Archive, which is our online image site, there's a selection of galleries there, and one of the galleries is entitled Henry Dixon's London, and you'll know you're in the right place because that's actually the image that we started the presentation with. So that was the inspiration for it. It's not everything by Henry Dixon that we have, but it covers the main topics we talked about today: the building of the Holborn Viaduct and the Society of Protection of the Relics of Old London. And if you're interested in, you don't just want a flavour, you need to do a bit more exhaustive research, you can keyword search by his name or by the name of Henry Dixon and Son. I think if you put in that as well, you'll get the other work as well. So they're all, everything we've looked at today is very easily accessible online. Are there any other questions from home, Simon? In which case, I think we will call that a day in terms of questions, unless there's anything else in the room. Okay, well, thank you again for coming along. As I say, it's always a treat to get to work with these old photographs and put these talks together. So I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it interesting, and hope it gives you a sense of the kind of things that we have here and some of the things that you can do with them as well. So thank you all again. Let me know when you're
trying to find the.
Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to.